Hey, good afternoon, folks. My name is Thomas Beck. I am the Deloitte Public Sector Cloud Lead, so our government cloud lead. I've been working serving state government clients for the better part of 20 years and working with AWS for 8 years. So I went back and had to last night triangulate when I made my first had my first conversation about AWS with a state client, and I found a deck from like 2009, and it was just entertaining going through and seeing some of the slides of how AWS used to look. There were 4 services at the time, as opposed to all the services there are now. There was so EC2. There was no EC2 Classic. There was just EC2 without a VPC, and there was so much white space on the console because there were just so few services. So it's really interesting seeing how things used to be. Conversations with states were really different back then as well. They sort of went like this. Let's talk about AWS. Is it secure? Can we talk about elasticity? Is it secure? AWS will order you pizza. It didn't at the time, obviously it does now. Is it secure, right? So security was really the trump card back then that got played in every cloud conversation. And then in about 2013, along comes Fed Cloud and government security, and voila, cloud becomes secure. Cloud is a safe place to go. Large 3-letter agencies in the Beltway go public with saying they're on cloud. So cloud becomes safe for everyone in the government at that point in time. The conversations changed complexion a bit. Now it was, let's talk about AWS. If I told you about, and the client would say, stop, you had me at AWS, but tell me about state clients specifically in my domain, that are actually running large mission-critical workloads on AWS. So that was really the next hurdle for us to get across, which gets us to where we are today, and the state of Maryland, doing some amazing things in the cloud. And I would postulate we need leadership. We continue to need leadership in the state space. More states blazing the path, carrying the torch forward with cloud. So I'm going to turn it over without further ado to John Evans and our Deloitte team to talk about what they're doing in the cloud in the state of Maryland.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm John Evans. I'm the Deputy Chief Technology Officer and the CISO with the state of Maryland. I'm going to talk to you a little bit today about debunking the myth of lift and shift. So let me see what we got. How do I do this? Okay. So I work for the Maryland Department of Human Services. That was a strategic decision that was made because that was the department that got the funding for a program that we're going to be working on. I'll be talking about that a little bit more on the next slide. A little bit about my qualifications, why I was kind of chosen to come in. Got multiple master's degrees in technical fields, multiple certifications, and when they were looking for someone to come in, they needed someone who had experience both implementing cloud environments and securing them, and they asked me if I would step up and help with this initiative. So just talk a little bit about how we got to where we are today. So the Maryland Department of Human Services and the state of Maryland overall, we largely had very siloed systems. It was hard to get information between systems, even within a single agency. There was no cross-platform, cross-system analytics available. Impossible for us to really tell how much constituents were truly costing the state. There was the potential for a poor handoff or someone to fall through the cracks as they transitioned between the different services, so no real continuity of care within the state. There was a lot of concern over fraud, waste, and abuse because we didn't have a consolidated person index or master data management system. There was a lot of old legacy systems that were continuing to accrue technical debt. The dependence on legacy systems, when I started at the state, I had no experience ever working with a green screen. I now, unfortunately, do. And for those of you who have ever tried to hire a COBOL programmer, you'll understand some of our difficulties with the legacy systems and the technical debt that we were incurring. Just overall, a lack of transparency and a lack of data sharing was stymieing us and was keeping us from being able to do a lot of things that we wanted to do within the state of Maryland. So we launched a program called MD Think. That's Maryland Total Human Services Integrated Network. MD Think was a vision to, at first it was really envisioned as a data platform to be able to bring all this data together across multiple systems within Department of Human Services, first because that's where the money came through from our federal partners, and then expand to the entire Health and Human Services portfolio within the state of Maryland, and then expand out beyond that to make our platform as a service available for the entire state. So we went through the funding exercise with our federal partners, explained to them this was going to help us increase efficiencies and lower cost. It was going to get us out of this technical debt that they were in large part paying for. It was going to allow us much better integration of data, much cleaner handoff, much more of a consolidated care model, a 360-degree care model, some other states call it. And the efficiencies, the money saving, and the compelling story that we were able to tell around the better services for our constituents really made this it really sold it to both our federal partners and our state partners. So this is a lot of our vision, what's on the screen now, for the MD Think platform. The vision is that a state agency can come and bring their code, bring their data. They can consume any of our services via APIs, or they can choose to join the platform where they integrate fully with our security stack, our identity access management, and then they're a part of the platform. So we, one of the key vision things that we, one of the key pieces of our vision was that we wanted the state to be the systems integrator on this effort. This is a little bit different, I think, from most other states, but in order to realize that vision, we had to make sure that we had a reliable partner, someone who would really partner with us and would be able to help us see that vision through. This is a completely new model for the state of Maryland, and I haven't heard of any other states that are taking something like that on. So we went and we got Deloitte on board with us to be that trusted partner who we knew would be able to supply us with the right people and would be able to advise us along the way on things that we may not know as the systems integrator based on some of their past efforts. So that's kind of how that relationship kind of came to be. So MD Think timeline, we first got our funding in February of 2017. We had an APD approval. One of the things that was different for us on this APD was, APD is the advanced planning document. I'm bad about using acronyms, I do it all the time in meetings. But APD is the advanced planning document, and it's typically a request for funds that you send out to the federal partners. There's different levels that the federal partners will fund your initiatives at, so anywhere from 50-50 up to 90-10, where they'll pay 90% of the costs and 10% of the costs only has to be incurred by the state. There's a waiver called the A87 waiver, which is a waiver to the A87 cost allocation method. The 87 cost allocation method, it allowed for 90-10 funding for Medicaid programs. The waiver said anything that touches Medicaid programs will give you 90-10 funding for. So we consolidated all the systems together into one APD so that we could get 90-10 funding across the board for all data, all platform activities within the MD Think platform. So if there's time left for a state to do that, I would highly recommend looking into leveraging that. It has saved us a lot of state funds by being able to do that. And it's totally allowed by our CMS and our federal partners. So we got our funding in February of 2017. Shortly after that is when we got Deloitte on board with us. And just about 8.5 months later, we had a fully ATO'd platform as a service platform up and running, hosting platform, ATO data platform that was either available for consumption via APIs external to the MD Think platform or for those applications that were hosted on the MD Think platform. We also had an initial application live in the environment. It was the Maryland Office of Refugees and Asylees case management system. So that was, right away, there was already benefits to the constituents, something tangible that the people who had given us the money were able to see. Previously, it was the Office of Refugees and Asylees benefits programs were literally managed via spreadsheets and faxes. So having an automated system was a huge difference. People were getting their benefits faster. It was more accurate. So within 8 months, we were able to show some progress there. And then this summer, we have long-term care going live. It's, I would say, our first major application going live. It's a non-Magi Medicaid program. So that's, even though it's only about 5% of the population, it's something like 90% of the money that goes into Medicaid, because these are people who require a lot of help and will likely require that help for the rest of their lives. And then next summer, we have, just to kind of go off the slide a little bit, next summer we have our child welfare, adult welfare and juvenile services application going live. We're calling that CJAMS, and that's going live next summer. And then we've got other eligibility enrollment programs coming on board next year. So kind of a quick timeline. So I just wanted to start with the background of MD Think, what it was, kind of how we got to where we are now. But like I said, one of the major one of the major pieces of the vision behind MD Think was that we were going to have this cloud-hosted platform where people could bring their data, bring their services, bring their applications to it. And so we knew we had to get to the cloud. As part of that conversation initially about how to get to the cloud, there was a lot of talks within the state about just a lift and shift type of drag and drop into the cloud. That was countered by the notion that we should rebuild things. So we kind of had to go through these talks back and forth at various levels, and we realized that there were some definite difficulties with any cloud migration. So first of all, you really have to want it. You have to have stakeholder buy-in. If you don't have the stakeholder buy-in to see the process through, at least initially, it's going to be really tough and your program may get shut down or defunded. And the reason for that is because seemingly nothing happens for a while. For us, we moved, I think, extremely quickly. We had a great team with us. We had some really good leadership and some really good executive buy-in on the state side. And we really worked together well so that we were able to get a ATO'd environment with an application up and running in about 8 months. When we talked to other states and some federal partners, they told us it was going to be more like 2 to 3 years. They kind of laughed at us at first when we said, we were going to be able to get there in less than a year. So very likely nothing's going to happen, and that could, if you don't have the right stakeholder buy-in, the right executive buy-in, it could mean bad things for your project. And that goes back to the obvious value is tough to demonstrate at first. Once things start rolling in an incremental fashion, you can more and more often show value coming out of your program. But at first, getting that initial security environment set up and getting everything figured out, it can be tough. And your process wasn't designed for this. Likely that includes your people, the people that you have, the process. They're probably not optimized for a cloud environment. You may not be running DevOps and Agile and some of these types of things that really enable you to take advantage of the cloud service provided capabilities much more rapidly. So that's something to think about. Is you're going to have to redesign some of your processes, and that includes I'm including people in that also. You may have to swap out some people or retrain some people to get them on board. And lastly, your app wasn't designed for this. You likely don't have applications that were designed for things like auto-scaling. You likely don't have them segmented into microservices, containerized microservices. You likely don't have them optimized for a cloud environment where they can consume the services that are offered by your CSP. So your app wasn't designed for this either, which is a hindrance to lift and shift, or can make any cloud migration really take longer and or make you not get the value out of your cloud migration that maybe your upper leadership thinks that you should be getting out of it. So we, like I said, there were people who were very much advocating for a lift and shift type of approach, which here I call the Brilliant Inbetween. Obviously that's sarcasm. These are some of the things I mentioned on the other slide, but just to kind of call them out more directly. You have a decreased ability to manage your CSP managed offerings. If your application wasn't designed to be able to leverage those types of offerings by your CSP, it's not going to be able to consume those features, which if it's not doing that, you're really missing out on one of the main reasons that you would want to go to the cloud. I would really ask you to look and consider if you really should move to the cloud if you're not able to consume some of those offerings. I would argue maybe not. And cloud is not always cheaper. If you have applications that are not designed to auto-scale and they're not segmented into microservices, you're not only going to be paying typically for max provisioning all the time on those applications, you're going to be paying for the same service max provisioned across multiple applications. So it's a lot of times you're not going to see any cost savings by moving to the cloud. So now you can't leverage the cloud service offerings. You're not seeing any cost savings. Why are you going to the cloud? Also, sins of the past become sins of the future. So what that kind of means is, in a lift and shift, you don't get the opportunity to move away from some of these inefficiencies that you've realized in the system now exists. Maybe you've had even changes in legislature or things like that haven't been able to be accounted for in your legacy systems because it's too cumbersome to make these changes. If you do a lift and shift, you're still stuck with all of these sins of the past that are still occurring in your systems. I would argue use that time, use some time and really optimize your systems. Bring them up to date, not just on the technology side, but on the process side also. And the bottom one there is security in the cloud. So there's, I think most of you are probably familiar with security in the cloud versus security of the cloud. Security in the cloud, AWS is responsible for, obviously. Security of the cloud, you're responsible for. I would say, and we ran into this in the state, our first CISO who was there during the implementation of this didn't understand a lot of it. We would have to have hour meetings to explain how the security is different between the cloud environment, because there's certain controls that are already in place on the Amazon side. We don't have to worry about those. We have some inherited controls, some FedRAMP type of features. Trying to explain the differences can take a while. You may not have the right people on staff to understand that, or it may take a long time. And also, something that we ran into is, and I think other states would have the same issue from discussions that I've had, is you may have a hosting provider now who is responsible for all of your operations, for managing your application, and for managing the security around your environment and your application. If you move into the cloud, you're typically, that service provider may not be the right person to manage your cloud environment, and you may not want them to. Like I said, we're acting as the SI as the state right now. So it's something to really keep in mind, is that if you move away from that service provider that's been providing you all these features, you now have to account for that somewhere else. And you're either going to need to have contractors brought in and put your full faith in them, so you better have some good contractors, or you're going to need to hire some new talent. And I would argue it's probably a mix of both, because I wouldn't want to give over full trust and control to any partner. Even if I did trust them, I would still want some checks and balances to be in place. I would want people on the state side or the government side who can at least understand and help make the decisions. So I think all four of these are major things to consider whenever you're moving into the cloud, and major reasons why a lift and shift should probably be your last choice for your cloud migration. So I'm going to go through this slide just really quickly. These are just some of the things to think about as you're trying to get into the cloud, especially if you are trying to do a lift and shift. These are the things that in a lift and shift would need to be considered and would likely suffer. So code portability. You could get locked into a single platform. If you have the opportunity to refactor your code, you can do things like containerize it, those types of things, and make it more portable between different cloud environments if you ever need to move also. Governance and security, I've talked about that quite a bit. Your governance, I talked a lot about the security side from a kind of a technical standpoint. Your governance standpoint also changes. There's different compliance standards that you're going to have to align with, so you're not only going to need to have people who understand the technical side, but who understand the differences on the regulatory and compliance and governance side as you move into the cloud. Data portability, similar to code portability. Data performance, if your applications and your databases aren't optimized for a cloud environment, you're not going to be able to make use of some of the scalability and flexibility, and you're likely to see data performance issues. Use of application services. This is what I was talking about earlier. If you don't have an application that's chunked up into microservices, you're going to be essentially paying for those same services, max provision, multiple times in multiple applications. Cloud native features. If your application can't consume the cloud service provider's offerings, you're not going to be able to utilize a lot of these benefits that are touted of moving into the cloud. And then finally, business agility, and this relates a lot back to the sins of the past become the sins of the future. If you just lift and shift into the cloud, you're stuck with the same technical debt, you're stuck with the same lack of efficiencies, and the same really inability to make the changes to your system that may be required over time that have kind of built up because of lack of resources or some of those other items that I mentioned earlier. So I'm going to turn this over to David for the next slide, who's going to talk a little bit about how we got there, how we teamed together, and have been making our progress.
Thank you, John. My name is David Wellington. I'm the Deputy Project Manager for the Deloitte team. I've actually had the unique opportunity of working with John and the state from the very beginning of this project. And it's also been a unique opportunity of mine where I've been able to do both the technical side and the management side. Early on, when it was a smaller team, I got my hands dirty. I got a couple AWS certifications, thought I was really cool, and thought I could talk to the team. And then they started going into this whole big platform and went straight over my head with guys like Jason that you'll hear talk in a few minutes. But it's been amazing to see this project go from this idea to now where it is, where we actually have real-life applications in the cloud. And there's three things that we wanted to focus on when we first started this project that I think for anybody who's trying to migrate to the cloud or have things in the cloud, it's important to remember these when you begin your project. Now, when we first, like I said, I started this project with John and the state, and one of the big things is when we sat down with him and they explained this massive vision that John has just talked about and gone over, we were both excited because it was a really cool, innovative project that we have not been hearing from many states or governments or anything like that. And so we were excited, but at the same time, we were a little bit terrified with the scope and scale that this would really entail. And what we did is we tried to focus on three key areas to kind of drive our vision and drive our partnership with the state. The first one, like it says, is setting your expectations appropriately. Second is incremental is the name of the game. And then third, it's not zero sum. Now, first, setting your expectations appropriately. As a project manager, I think the very first thing you learn in project management is always making sure that everybody's on the same page, right? We always want to make sure that as the contractor and the client, we're synchronized, right? But one of the things that we did when we sat down with the state and the vision that they came to us with was making sure that this is a massive, massive scope. We're talking about no lift and shift. We're talking about creating a platform from scratch. Okay, using AWS services, using other services that we're bringing into the environment. But that's a big, big ask of any team, of any government, of any agency. And so we sat down and we made sure, both from their side and our side, that our expectations of what that end point looked like, and every different stage along the way, what did those look like? And we made sure that we set that expectation appropriately, because if not, right, we can go in and say, oh, we're going to have the biggest cloud, and it's going to be functioning on day one, and everything's going to be great. Okay, well, that might not be true. And so we made sure, and the state definitely made sure, that we all had our expectations set appropriately. The second one is incremental is the name of the game. Now, what do we mean by that? I think this goes hand in hand with setting your expectations appropriately. When the state came to us and we kind of sat down with this project, they said that they were going to be using an agile methodology, right? As the team, we went back, and in the meeting, we're like, great, this is great to hear. When we got back to the office, we were all jumping for joy. We were excited because we were going to be able to do this in an agile methodology. And I think for all of us, especially in IT, right, we're hearing this agile, and if you're doing development and applications, that's an easy thing to kind of jump on right now. But we were doing a platform. We were doing hardware, if you will, in the sense of building something in the cloud that's not necessarily just the application. And doing an agile methodology for building a platform is a little bit challenging because you're not doing code deployments, you're not doing the typical things that an agile project might have. But we worked with the state and we sat down and we said, okay, this is how we're gonna work this out. Building this platform, we have to do it in these incremental stages. And so what we did is it allowed us to focus our 2-week sprints, right? We were all used to 2-week sprints and different time periods. And so we said, okay, we're gonna focus on this 2 weeks. And we were able to set those expectations of what we were doing for that 2 weeks. Then we would say, okay, now we're gonna focus on this aspect, and we would build it. And slowly and surely, well, actually pretty quickly, like you said, we did it in about 9 months instead of a year and a half, like most people were saying. We got to the point where we had a platform, and it was off to the security team to ATO. And I remember Jason would come in every morning and write how many days left on the board. It's like in the movies. He literally was writing on the board. We got 12 days, gentlemen. We've got 9 days. We've got 5 days. We've got 1 day. And I remember when we were finally done, just with the platform piece, we all kind of looked at each other and were like, what did we just do? Like, it was incredible to see what the team had been able to do. But all because of first setting those expectations and then making sure that you're doing it in that incremental way. Because that allowed us to also say, every 2 weeks, we would sit down and we would plan with John and the other leadership at the state. And we would say, this is what we're doing. They say, well, actually, let's maybe go this direction. Or we would say, well, let's actually go this direction. And that allowed us to keep the true vision at hand, to be able to say, okay, this is where we want to go. This is what we're going to do. And then finally, third, it's not a zero-sum game. I feel like sometimes where maybe you don't have your entire application up in the cloud and running and saving money like you might want to have it be, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you've failed. And that was a big point in our project, was that this is a massive, massive project. Okay, I think I keep saying that a million times because it literally was. It is a massive project. And it was important to all of us to understand as a team, and it is along with the state, that just because we're doing piece by piece by piece, that we weren't losing at anything. Just because we had a little piece of one application in the cloud, that was great. You know why? Because we were using our identity access management platform. We were using our data platform. We were using all of these massive pieces of our infrastructure that we had built, this platform that we had built. And we were just building upon that. It wasn't this lift and shift and just moving it over and saying, yep, we're good because there's something in the cloud. We were building for the cloud. And that was something that was really, really important for us, that we were making sure that all of these great things, right? We're at an AWS conference. We just heard a wonderful speech about all of the great things that you can do. But in reality, you can't get to that point. You can't get to where you want to be, where you can stand on the stage at AWS GovSummit and have those great speeches unless you are building for the cloud. And I think that's the 3 key things that we really focused on when we started this project, and working with the state hand in hand, that partnership like John talked about, is obviously one, making sure those expectations were set appropriately. Second, making sure you're doing it in an incremental way. That helps you set those expectations along the way. And then finally, it's not zero sum. When you get there, you get there. The things that you're building, it's going to be great. It's going to be awesome because you're moving it to the cloud as long as you're doing it in the right way. And so that's basically the 3 key things that we focused on. And that's from a higher level, right? And now, Jason, I'm going to turn over to Jason to talk a little bit more about some of the technical aspects and how we got away from the lift and shift to the actual building a platform in the cloud.
Thanks, David. Good morning, everyone. My name is Jason Ramsey. I'm a specialist leader with Deloitte Consulting, and I've been serving as the chief architect for MD Think for the last 15 months. Prior to that, I actually worked for another DHS, helping them to get into the cloud as well with their Homeland Security Information Network, which was also a pretty awesome thing to be involved in. I feel like cloud actually just landed randomly in my lap, about 5 years ago, which is, I think, is probably true for pretty much anyone that's been working on it. Almost no one says, "Ooh, cloud, let's learn all about that straight out of college." It's just something that kind of happens as your clients evolve and as your direction is pushed in new and exciting ways. But that said, I've had a great opportunity over the last 23 years in technology to actually do a lot of really interesting things in traditional systems engineering and network engineering, as well as traditional platform support and design within data centers. And that's why that's lent itself well to these very cutting edge and exciting cloud opportunities that I've had the opportunity to work on. I unfortunately have to use notes, so I'm going to refer to my phone. I'm not texting anyone, I promise. So we spent a lot of time today talking about the theory behind MD Think, the vision that actually got us to an ember that became MD Think. And so I'd like to spend the last little bit of time that we have here, and honestly, I don't know how much time we have because the clock's been doing wonky things, but I'm going to do my best. We're going to spend a little bit of time, the last bit of time here, talking through kind of a little bit of technical depth to the kinds of things that we did along the way. And there's 4 things that I'm going to talk about. First of all, let's talk about our architectural considerations. So these are the drivers that we had along the way to get us to the actual implementation, the teeth of the rubber meeting the road and all those other cliches. First and foremost, we had to make a decision from the get-go on how we were going to organize our non-production and our production enclaves within the environment. You have the option, obviously, of creating as many accounts as you want to in the AWS umbrella and putting your systems into them and connecting them in certain ways. Our selection was to actually give all of our application development teams their own AWS account and segment that into multiple development enclaves, a couple of smoke test and integration test environments, a UAT environment, and a training environment. So each of them have these 8 separate little enclaves within those accounts. And then we have a pre-production environment and then a production environment. We also have something we call our core environment. It's just our common operating region or our shared services platform, which actually has all of our DevOps enablers and our security systems and things of that nature. And I'll go into that in a little more depth in the next bullet. The frameworks that we wanted to make sure that we supported, well, we wanted to have some flexibility. So, the idea here is we don't necessarily need to have an environment that is all just one type of application framework. It can be J2EE, it can be .NET Core, it can be a number of other things. Obviously, because we're trying to get a couple of things out of the way as fast as possible, we had to make some decisions and choices. And we chose to start with J2EE with an AngularJS front end. We had a commitment to portability. John mentioned that earlier. We have Docker. As much as we can have Docker, we have Docker. The idea being that we can take these discrete capabilities in their little containers, and we can move them as is from enclave to enclave as we promote them through the least governed environments to the most governed environments. It's neat because it gives us a lot of flexibility, the ability to for the developers to do a lot of innovative things and fail fast and do all the nifty cloud things you're supposed to do, but then actually be able to exactly replicate that functionality as things are promoted through. The client also gave us kind of a direction at the beginning that they didn't necessarily, and I hate to say this at an AWS conference, but they didn't necessarily want to be tied to any specific CSP. So we had to make some decisions on tools and managed services that we would use and those that we would not use because we didn't want to too heavily tie ourselves to any one CSP and the off chance that we had to go someplace else. So just kidding, AWS, we're not moving anywhere. I think one of the more important things that we focused on was the fact that development, it starts in the cloud and it stays in the cloud. A lot of instances, your development teams are using sandboxes with their own laptops, and that's okay too, because again, as long as we're committed to using that portable Docker framework and microservices throughout, that escalation and promotion actually happens very fluidly and without any issues. In this particular case, we wanted to make sure that the first development environment that anyone touched was checking code into our core source code repository that is being built and smoke tested by our DevOps enablers and stays in the cloud as it goes through the different wickets. The second bullet we'll talk about is tooling decisions, and really I'm just going to run through this super quick. Deloitte, as a organization, we actually embrace this idea called minimum viable cloud, or MVC. You may or may not have heard of that. But we actually got there kind of independently. We built our own meme, I guess, around the idea of MVC, because we said, you guys have given us 8 months to do 2 years worth of work. So what are the absolute minimum things we need to put into the cloud, the minimum tool sets, the minimum capabilities that will allow us to meet the stringent compliance standards that are given to us through things like FSMA 853 and the other compliance standards. And again, we'll talk through that a little bit more in the next bullet as well. But so that's a lot of what drove our decisions and what we put into the cloud and how we did it. So I've mentioned these a couple times previously. We have our core DevOps tools, Jenkins, Bitbucket, ProGit, Artifactory, configuration management we're doing using Ansible. Our test suites, so we have a number of test capabilities within the environment. We're doing real-time smoke tests and integration tests using SonarQube, which is part of our CI/CD pipeline. We have Selenium Grid to do UI tests and things of that nature, and we also have Fortify for doing code scanning. I think one of the things that you should get from this conversation is that we had security in the very front of our mind as we built this thing. We wanted to make sure that we weren't building something that was ever going to get hacked. I think Subi, the CTO, was always talking about how he wanted to make sure that the security people had gray hair because they'd been down this road before and they know how to fix these problems. And I don't have gray hair yet, but they worked on it. They worked on me on that. We have compliance scanning using Nessus, our SIEM and APM, application performance monitoring. We're using Splunk Core and ITSI. We have knowledge management in the cloud using Confluence, so all of our engineering documentation, our how-to guides, things of that nature are maintained in a wiki-style format in Confluence. And then we do our service desk and compliance tracking using Jira Service Desk. So just I wanted to give you kind of a highlights of where we were from our core services capability. Our third bullet here, we talk very quickly. I'm just going to run through this: FSMA, HIPAA, 1075, compliance, and FedRAMP. I don't know if I have 12 minutes or 2 minutes, but let's see what happens. Again, we've talked about there's 201 basic controls in FSMA, the 853 Rev 4 moderate, which is what we built the system to. We also had to think about PII information, HIPAA compliance because of health data that was in the environment or would be in the environment. And we also, because we have integrations with the federal government, the IRS 1075 standard was important for us to maintain compliance with as well. The nice thing about this, obviously, is that because most of AWS is FedRAMPed, a large number of the managed services that we leveraged, we're able to inherit those controls. That made things a lot easier than having to go build our own data center and then try to maintain compliance with those standards from the get-go. One thing that I think is pretty critical to our success is the fact that we had very heavy operational integration between the integration or infrastructure team and the security compliance team. So, if we had an idea on how we might want to do something, we'd run that by their security compliance folks. They'd make sure it didn't raise any red flags, and if it did, we'd figure out how we're going to fix them. And if it didn't, then we'd go to the races. So it allowed us to be very flexible, very agile in terms of our ability to deliver. And last, we're continual improvements on a security perspective. We track our deficiencies and shortcomings through plans of actions and milestones following ATO, just like anybody does in any government setup. And we track and update those things sprint over sprint, so that's very important. So the last bullet here, let's be real, we're getting there too. I don't want to paint the picture that we're done. This cloud implementation, this platform as a service, is something that we built as a foundational component to what has become the potential for a very large application hosting system for something like 2.5 million citizens of the state of Maryland. And because of the fact, again, we move so fast to get to our deadlines, there are definitely some important things that simply aren't done yet. It's just to be honest. On one hand, our application automation is pretty mature. We have our Jenkins in place. Our builds are happening. We're getting tests happening in an incremental way. But our infrastructure automation is actually just in its infancy. We are, for example, just starting to introduce Packer and Terraform into our environment to do on-demand infrastructure builds. And that's coming as we go through our next set of go-lives in the next month or so, that John referenced earlier. We're incrementally expanding features and functionality on top of the minimum requirements to improve capabilities. Right now, we have a focus on getting our infrastructure monitoring, alerting, and end-to-end application performance monitoring. They're kind of our focus tools at the moment. And then we're also looking at expanding the footprint of what application frameworks that we're actually going to allow in the environment. John made an oblique reference to it earlier, talking about the idea of, bring your code to our environment and we'll host it for you. And that's exactly the kind of vision, that's what we're trying to achieve and realize through the MD Think environment. J2EE is not the only application framework, obviously, so we're open to expanding that, and we're looking at expanding that into .NET Core, for example, probably in the next 9 to 12 months. The last thing I think I'll talk about is really just more of a procedural thing. It's not even really about technology, but we are currently working to improve our workforce deployment and task area definition. Right now we have an infrastructure team that is a very highly specialized team of engineers, and unfortunately they're spending a lot of their time doing operations maintenance and help desk support type work, which that stymies progress. So one of the things that we're looking to improve is to actually segment those work streams into 2 separate teams to allow us, the engineering team, to continue to push forward and make that innovation happen in the rate that we have before. I'll just close with saying that I think that MD Think is a great example of what is achievable when a motivated client, such as John in the state, that is excited and committed to cloud migration, partners with knowledgeable folks that know what they're doing in the cloud. I'm actually pretty humbled to have actually been a part of it. And I know that none of this would have been accomplished if we had just decided to rehost a bunch of legacy, disconnected, broken systems in the cloud. And I think that it's great that we actually got to do it what I would view to be the right way. So I think we have some time for question and answer. That's either 8 minutes or 9 minutes. I'm not sure. There's microphones in the middle of the room. If you guys would like to ask any questions, please feel free. I'd love to hear what questions you might have.
While architecting this platform, did you guys consider using existing platforms as a service instead of creating one? Example, OpenShift or Pivotal, or those kind of tools?
No, we knew that we wanted to create our own platform. That was part of the vision that we had decided early on in the project. Now, we've utilized other tools and templates and those types of things to help us get there a little bit faster, but
Did you rule it out for some technical reasons or monetary reasons or flexibility?
I think it was just more because, well, everybody, well, I shouldn't say that. There's a lot of people in government that feels that they're sort of a unicorn when it comes to what they need out of a system. I came largely out of DoD and Intel, and you see it even more so there, I think. But the idea was kind of that it was maybe hard for us to find something that would provide us everything that we needed, including the flexibility, the compliance with, so some of the compliance areas might be harder later. As CISO, that was something that I was very, very involved with, very, very, very concerned about. So it was never really it was something that came up, but it was quickly pushed aside in favor of developing our own platform.
So once you guys had a platform, moving a monolithic application into a microservices-based, Kubernetes orchestrated application is a very difficult or a heavy load. What were your experience have you guys done any of those work yet, or just have the platform ready right now?
I want to make sure I understood the question correctly. It was, so once we had a platform that could support these applications, how difficult was it for us to
take an existing monolithic app and make it a cloud services app?
So we didn't try to refactor existing apps at all. We didn't try to do moving any existing apps or even refactoring existing apps. We basically looked from a ground up build of the new apps. So first we started with optimization of business processes. So before we even got to the IT side, we mapped out all of our business processes, looked at optimization of those, and then we identified deltas that we would need to change in the current systems versus the new system to realize some of those efficiencies. And we did that sort of work before we even started doing any coding. But kind of what I was mentioning earlier is by doing it that way, we were able to get rid of some of those sins of the past as we moved to the future. So it wasn't like we had to try to retrofit microservices into the existing applications. As part of that business process mapping, we were able to segment our microservices.
Just as a follow-up to that, so from a technical perspective, what that what that actually means when we have a new application developer come to the platform, they have a set of ideas, a set of functionality that they want to provide. We have a number of design patterns that we have developed, for what that looks like. It was a multi-tier application. What's the data? What's the data layer? What's your microservices play? And the idea being that they need to kind of conform their design to one of these accepted design patterns, and then implement against that. And as I mentioned before, it just becomes a matter of them pushing their code into to our source code repository, our Bitbucket, and then our DevOps team, which is one of the teams that reports to me, actually builds the build patterns and the build configurations in Jenkins to actually get those things taken care of. So we've managed to get one of the MDH applications came through very fast. I think it was one of the first ones that we were able to push in where we weren't building the airplane as we were flying it.
MDH is Maryland Department of Health.
Maryland Department of Health, excuse me. And we were able to do that in just 30 days as an example. And that's the kind of cadence we see coming as new things are integrated. Great question.
Thank you. That was a really inspiring presentation. My question is kind of how you spanned that gap between that analyst or that that HR person at the green screen all the way up to some of the senior people in government, and with such a green field, how you manage to keep those pieces of the program in sync, almost from a program management standpoint, but with so much technology in play.
That's a very complex answer.
Yeah, I imagine.
I can touch on it in a minute here, but if you'd like to have a follow-up conversation, it might. I could give you more details on how we're able to do that, because I'm not going to be able to answer all of that in the time that we have, unfortunately. I mean, we started with some proven methodologies, and one of the first things that we really had is, the MD Think really started as the data layer vision, the vision of integrating all the data across the Health and Human Services agencies and then scale out to the state layer. That vision was come up with by the former governor's chief of staff, really, and the governor in conjunction. So we had a lot of top-level buy-in on this. It was a huge benefit for us that it was these people's vision who now we got to. I was the first person hired onto MD Think. I named it, it was really cool when I heard about this vision, and then got to work with the other state people to build out what that vision would look like, and then get to bring in some partners who could help us execute on that vision. But that top level buy-in was crucial initially for the first year and a half of the program. If we didn't have that, I don't think we would be anywhere close to where we are today. We could be defunded by now, but they stuck with us, and we have very solid methodologies. We use something called Scaled Agile Framework. It scales nicely for us. It enables the use of some of the different agile methodologies, including, we use Kanban a little bit more on the infrastructure side. We have program increment planning sessions every 10 weeks where we plan out the capabilities, and we've got the sprint where we plan out tasks. We have an epic level roadmap where we plan out everything for 6 months. So it provides a good kind of in-between between the PMP world where people are used to, where they see a full scope, versus Agile, where they get to see at least a high-level scope with dollars estimated fairly accurately over a 6-month period, and then more and more granular breakdown of work and estimation as it goes on. I think that's the best I can answer in the time that we have.
No, that's great. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for sharing your story. I'm just curious if you could talk a little bit more about issues around or challenges you overcame in dealing with the data that resides in the legacy systems. I assume that, to make your applications meaningful, you've got to reach out to a lot of that information, and sort of the barriers in the governance of your greenfield versus the governance of those brownfields.
Yeah, so I deal with that a lot. I guess maybe I should have said it I didn't mention this in my intro. So as Deputy Chief Technology Officer, I oversee the infrastructure team and the data team, and then as CISO, I oversee the security and governance teams. So that's something I have to deal with all the time. It definitely causes challenges because we have, in some cases, we have legacy environments that have been around for so long, there was no real accreditation process, and some of these compliance standards and state standards, as we're going back in and digging, they didn't even have an ATO maybe on some of these systems. And now we want to connect that data to my ATO'd environment. And now we want to connect that data to my ATO'd environment, and we're having to go back and perform manual validations on this stuff. So it's taking longer than we thought it would in some of these cases, because we're having to retroactively fit the governance into these systems that weren't designed for it. Now there's other contractors that have SLAs for uptime and stuff like that, and now they're giving us pushback potentially on well, we're not going to be able to do this if you're making us do this other piece here. Yeah, that's another question we can talk about more offline. These are good questions you guys are asking. Unfortunately, I don't have the time to answer all of them right now, but I'd be happy to follow up with you.
I got it. Sorry.
We're trying to stay on track here. But thank you so much. We just got a round of applause for our great speakers.